So this morning, Pamela is going to give her artist talk, and I'm not going to really say much except she's going to take us down the garden path. So Pamela, this is Pamela.
Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Aldous. I didn't get to hear his introduction, so I don't know what he said, but I have been quilt making for over 30 years. I started quilt making in my late 20s in traditional quilting, making quilts for beds, babies, and fun. And then in my late 30s, I had the opportunity to take a class with Nancy Crow in New Zealand, where we were living. Nancy Crow has been a leader in the world of quilt making in both the United States and abroad for over 40 years. Her work is held in multiple museums across the world, and she's won many awards, including National Living Treasure by the University of North Carolina and Master of Medium by the James Renwick Alliance for Craft, part of the Smithsonian Institute. So Nancy, in 2017, I was down at the barn studying, taking classes, and she said, what we need is a gallery dedicated to promoting quilts as art. I wasn't even near her. I was on the other side of the room, and she turned and she pointed at me and she said, and you should be the one to build it. Well, I laughed. Yeah, right, never gonna happen, yet here we are. So there are very few galleries that actually routinely offer solo shows to artists working in the medium of quilt making. And as you can see, it's not until you are in a room with one artist's work can you fully appreciate their artistic development and their unique voice. The goal of this gallery is to do exactly this. We want to offer leading artists who are working in this medium the opportunity to have solo shows so their whole body of work can be seen. And we're going to promote their work through catalogs, printed materials, limited edition prints, as well as the sale of the actual quilts. So I hope that you enjoy this show and many shows to come. And I'm just going to point out, we have a few future artists here. Marina Komenskaya, giveaway. Her show is going to be next summer. Behind her is Pat Budge. Pat Budge's show is going to open in March. Peggy was here. Her show is going to be in September, but she had to go. So anyhow, what do you think when you think of the word garden? I actually grew up in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and our house was surrounded by Amish farmland. So the first vision I have in my mind are the huge vegetable gardens that Amish would have. And it was interesting because they would ring the gardens with flowers that would keep the bugs out of the vegetables. Later, our family moved to New Zealand. And in New Zealand, the garden is your little bitty, teeny tiny backyard. So my garden series started in 2008. We had moved back to the States. My daughter, Winona, was 10 years old. And she said to me, Mommy, why do all my cousins have quilts made by you and I don't? To set the record straight, she did have a baby quilt made by me, even hand quilted by me, but it was stored safely in a closet. She didn't know where it was. And not all of her cousins had quilts, just some. And then she went on to say, I want a quilt made by you with your hand-dyed fabrics. Well, I had started hand-dyeing fabrics maybe the year before, but I had not used these fabrics in any quilts yet. And I didn't have a lot of them. But I was kind of taken aback by this very direct, specific request. All I could say was, okay. So I turned away from what I thought was my important artistic pursuits to make a quilt out of love for my daughter. And this is this piece right here, Winona's Garden. I thought, I'm gonna be really fast, I'm gonna whip this sucker out. So the first thing I did, there's 3 stages to quilt making. The first is design. And what I do for my designs is I start with the flower figures or the figures. I cut them out with a rotary cutter. I do not use templates. I do not use rulers. It's all free-form cutting. I pin it to my walls. My studios are covered with a product called Homosote, which is a soundproofing material that you can pin into, and I paint them white. So it's pinned into the wall, and I did those 6 top figures first. My first thought was, I want to be fast. The whole quilt is going to be the same figure. Well, I got bored. I'm like, that's boring. Why can't I do other figures? So then I started playing around and creating these other flower-like forms. And I got it all the flowers figured, pinned to the wall. And then it was time to do the background. Prior to this, I had always dyed in the summertime in my garage sink, and then I would put my little plastic bins of fabric and dye in the sun, using the sun to help cure it. Well, it was winter in Michigan. That wasn't gonna work. So I thought, well, I'll just use my laundry room. My husband was not impressed to find blue and yellow permanent dye stains down the cream-colored cabinets. That's when I realized I needed to have a permanent dye studio space I could use year-round. So I moved my what I had set up in the garage to the basement. I added a washer and a dryer so I could promise my husband that no active dye would travel through the finished house. And I dyed the background fabrics for that piece. So the first part is design, and it's not until I have every single piece pinned to the wall do I begin the second step of quilt making, and that is sewing it all together, or also called piecing. All of my work is pieced. I do not do any applique work. I appreciate those who do, I just don't. And what you'll see too with my composition is you're never gonna find a line that goes all the way from the top to the bottom or side to side. I have lots of small lines, and I treat each line like it's a pencil line in a drawing. Those seams have got to support the overall composition. Once you get it all pieced together, you're going to do the third stage, which is machine quilting. But before you can machine quilt, you have to baste it. So I take the finished top, I add the batting, and I add the backing, and I put it into my quilt frame, and I hand baste it. The better you baste your work, the easier it will be to machine quilt it, and you will be happy that you took the time. And that takes a week to baste it, and then I use 2 different types of quilting. I do not own a long arm, and I do not, there are these new fancy quilting machines where you can use like a hoop and press a button, and it's gonna create a design of your choice. Some people do that, I don't. Everything I do is directed by my hand. So in the figures, I use a walking foot and straight line quilting. In the background, I do free motion quilting. Free motion quilting is when you're literally moving the fabric underneath the needle as it goes up and down. It's the equivalent of drawing by moving the piece of paper while the pencil is stationary. So this piece that I was going to whip out quickly took me 4 years. However, I loved what I was doing. This is the first piece that I had juried into a show in the United States after I had lived in New Zealand for 8 years. This was in the AQA show at the Schweinfurth, and I had a little epiphany. I realized that there were artists who were serious about art making who actually made stuff that wasn't totally abstract. Like, I could be a serious artist and do stuff like this. Wow. I was like, wow, what could I do next? I like this, I like what I'm doing. So it became a whole new direction in my work. So I was like, well, what could I do next? What could I do next? Well, my husband is an applied linguist at Michigan State University, and we get to travel the world together. And we traveled for fun too, not just work. And we took a trip to Palm Springs, California, and he's a bird watcher. So anywhere we're going to nature preserves, national parks, state parks, because that's where the birds are. And we were at one kind of park, and I went into the building and I was reading about the area, and I read about flowers that only bloom at night. I was like, what? how have I never heard of this before? And I read a little bit further and I found out that there is one rare desert flower that blooms one night a year, but it's a huge bloom. And the nickname of this flower is Queen of the Night. Like my next idea, Midnight Garden. That's this piece here. And that's my rendition of Queen of the Night. This took me 2 years. So, 6 years, 2 quilts, that's not really good. You need to be making more work to be productive and develop as an artist. And I was trying to figure, can I take this garden idea and translate it into smaller works that I could make more of and more quickly? So I started this series here. There's 5 that you can see back behind this wall. This is my botanical portrait series. On these, if you look at the card, there's 2 dates, 2014/2021. What that means is I designed and pieced this piece in 2014, but I didn't quilt it until 2021. And as you look at the development of my artistic work, not only are my compositions changing and evolving, but what I'm doing on the quilting surface is always also changing and evolving. So in 2014, I was back at the barn with Nancy Crow, and I asked her if I could critique my botanical portraits, and then I wanted her to critique my critique of myself. Because if you're going to be an artist, you have to learn to critique your own work. And at that time too, Nancy had invited me to submit work for an upcoming invitational show called Circular Abstractions. This show, all of the work had to be based on the traditional quilt block called the bullseye. I'm sure you're thinking of a bullseye, like target practice. That's exactly what it looks like, and I was very uninspired, like really a bullseye. But one of my pieces behind this wall, I had done something like that. And so I asked Nancy, could I do something like this for your bullseye challenge? And she said, why, yes, you can. I was like, yes, I have an idea for this. So when I went home, I had never done this before. I have 2 design walls. One's a little bigger than the other. I designed Junglescape here and the Ice Garden simultaneously. I got those 2 pieces designed and sewn in 8 weeks. Woo, record for Pam. And then because I was in such a roll, I went and I designed this one on that same bullseye idea. I love this quilt. I had so much fun making it. And I would love to do a whole series of imagery like cosmic blooms, exploding novas. I really, truly have more ideas than time in life. And so then I went back to the barn and you had to take your quilts with you so Nancy could see them in person. And she's like, I love all 3, but Pam, you didn't pay attention. I'm like, oh, she said they have to be a minimum of 76 by 76 inches. So this is the only one big enough. I was like, oh, okay. But then later that week, she pulled me aside and she said, what if you did a 4th piece for me? She's like, what if you did one of your garden quilts with the bullseye theme? And I'm like, Nancy, this is June. She wanted this piece all quilted and finished by the end of July. And it would take me a month just to do that. She's asking for a whole new piece. Like, okay. So I go home and then that is the quilt I designed. You can clearly see the bullseye design in that. And I did finish it in Nancy's time limit. And she loved it. She wanted it in the show, and it was big enough for the show. But now I had 2 quilts that needed to be quilted, and she was only going to give me 4 weeks. I said, Nancy, I need a minimum of 7 weeks to get them both done. She said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And I'm like, I'm sorry, you're only getting that one. But that was a very important, pivotal moment for me. It made me realize that I can do it if I give my creativity the power, the energy, and the time that needed to happen in order to make it happen. So shortly after this, I had another deadline. There is an event for those of us who are pursuing quilt making as an art form. Our Super Bowl is called Quilt National. I had done my first Quilt National entry, I think in 1998 or 99. I did not get in. So I looked at my calendar, I counted the weeks. I had 10 weeks to create something from start to finish and get it entered into Quilt National. And I'm like, you know what? I think I can do it. And I told my husband, this is what I want to do. And he's like, yeah, I'll cook, I'll shop, I'll let, go be in your studio. I could not have done all this without my husband's support. So yes, the piece, I don't want to laser point anybody's eyeballs. This piece right here was my first piece that was accepted and juried into Quilt National. And you'll see that's not the piece, because that piece was bought by the International Quilt Museum a couple of years ago for their Quilt National collection. And because what gets measured gets improved, I started with this quilt keeping time cards of how long it took me to do every activity. And also people ask you, how long did that take? Well, I'm like, that took 4 years, but it wasn't really 4 years because there was lots of time I didn't work on it. I made it over 4 years. So in this piece, it took me 427 hours to make that piece from start to finish, not including the dyeing time, not counting that. And then also, I was really surprised to learn the 3 activities, the designing, the piecing, the quilting, was pretty much in thirds. If you would ask me, quilting takes forever, but actually, it's really 1/3 of what it took me to do. The other thing that people ask me is how many pieces did I sew together? So I haven't done it in all the quilts, but in that quilt, that's over 500 pieces that I cut out and sewed back together. And the other thing people ask me is how many different fabrics? There's over 200 different fabrics dyed by me in that composition. And going to the opening of Quilt National, I said to my husband, there's one award I hope I don't get. I got it. It's called Persistent Pace. And it's for the person who had entered the most times, and it took the most years for them to get a piece of the quilt. Woohoo, I won! I did have someone who tied with me, so we shared that title together. And then I also won the Heartland Award for that particular quilt. As I work, I have a lot of time to think and reflect. And I've been working in this garden series for almost 2 decades now, and thinking a lot about gardens as a metaphor for life, and thinking about that gardens don't just appear, they don't just happen, they are planned. I've been to gardens like the Garden of Versailles is a couple centuries old. And people plan it, and they cultivate these plants and trees. What about our lives? Like for me as an artist, there's a lot of mythology wrapped about what it is to be an artist. The truth is, being an artist is getting up and going to your studio, whether you feel like it or not, whether or not inspiration hits or not, and getting to work. And one of my favorite quotes by Pablo Picasso is, inspiration does exist, but it has to find you working. And so if we are more mindful about what we want to create with our lives, we need to be thinking about what are we cultivating in our lives? What seeds are we planting in the soil of now that's going to bear fruit in the future? And those are some of the concept and themes behind my work that you see here. So I'm going to talk about 2 more pieces. I had a friend challenge me. She's like, you're doing this garden series, but none of your plants are green. I'm like, well, the backgrounds are green, right? So I'm like, okay, challenge accepted. So I started laying out my design here with my green plant forms. And I'm like thinking, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? Another trip happened. We went to Santa Fe, New Mexico. I wanted to go down Canyon Road and visit all the galleries. And of course, we were driving all around that area, which is desert. Desert garden. And red is my go-to color. My comfort color is red. I loved all the shades of red in the background. Oh, and this is another artistic evolution. I'm a little embarrassed. It took me so long to think of this. But you'll see straight line quilting in the figures in all of my early work, just up and down, up and down, up and down. And it wasn't until the Quilt National piece I thought maybe I could do something more interesting in the flower figures than just straight up and down. So that piece, some of the figures are quilted differently. In this piece, all of the figures are quilted differently. And I love the quilting in the figures on this piece. The other thing you will notice, particularly in this figure, is I always use variegated thread. That means that's one spool of thread that changes color. Sometimes the color will be a very subtle, soft change. Sometimes it's going to be a dramatic change from like yellow to purple to green. So that creates an unexpected pop of color across the surface of the quilt that I don't fully control, that I think gives it a spark and gives it life. So the last quilt I'm going to talk about is this one back here. This is the most recent one that is finished in the series. That is called Secret Garden. And that actually is a portrait of my family. And Secret Garden represents like a private garden that is well tended and protected. And I might embarrass people, but Sean is the purple flower. I'm the red flower. The twins are here, the hosta-like plants, and my daughter is up there. I think one of the most significant and important things I will ever make is a family. And I'm very grateful that I have mine. So, closing thoughts. There is a reason why urban planners create green spaces. Life's hard, difficult, demanding. We need a space where we can go. I think nature is restorative. For me, my space is my studio where I go and I celebrate all that is good and beautiful in this world. Ultimately, this series is about cultivating joy by reflecting on beauty. Thank you.